What's poppin'? Welcome back to the beach, where today Maxify Seminar is bringing back an old segment from the channel.
Top 5.
Top
So-
5 time travel movies.
Yeah. So basically, I'm a big fan of time travel movies.
And so am I. We watched a lot of time travel movies all in a row, I think a couple summers ago.
Yeah.
And we've been on the lookout for good ones ever since. We've seen a lot of the time travel movies that are out there. We've probably seen almost all of the ones that are worth seeing.
Yeah.
And
And maybe some of the ones that weren't worth seeing.
First of all, let's go over criteria. We have decided we're not going to talk about franchises because that gets a little bit messy. So
like no Back to the Future.
No Back to the Future,
Terminator.
We're not going to deal with Star Trek or
Hot Tub
Avengers.
Time Machine.
Yeah, and that does discount Hot Tub Time Machine. And also, we're not going to talk about time loop movies.
So that's like Groundhog Day, Palm Springs.
Things like that, Source Code. We're also not going to be talking about stuff where it's one time travel, and then it's like they go through that, and it's like a more dramatic type thing, where time travel's not like a bigger part of it. Like something like It's a Wonderful Life or Peggy Sue Got Married.
So let's get into it. In the number 5 spot, we have
About Time.
About Time.
So this one is one of the ones we watched more recently, and what makes this one so special is it's a time travel movie that's also a very compelling romance movie.
Yeah, and kind of comedy at the same time too, which you don't see that often in time travel movies.
It's a lot rarer. It's also this movie's just kind of a good meditation on like how to live your life, because he does like go back and relive.
It kind of has this question
days.
of like, do you want to live out the perfect day, or is that too perfectionist? And like, is it good to make mistakes,
or is it more about living in the moment? Moving on now to our number 4 spot. This is going to be
Primer.
So Primer is an independent movie. It was shot on 16 millimeter. So it's a little bit off cuff, but this is a notorious movie.
Yeah. So we've seen this movie, and probably one of the reasons why it's kind of low on the list. It's very confusing. Because there's time travel, and then there's time travel within time travel.
Yeah.
And then you can...
And there's also twists and double crosses between the two main characters, and they're like, you don't know everything that's happening, and certain characters know more than others, and you don't know as much as certain characters.
The first time we saw this, we came out of it not knowing what the main... what it was.
Well, yeah.
What happened.
We did not understand one of the main conflicts of the movie. And even on second watch, I understand a lot better now, but this is a great experience, and I think
I would need to watch it a third time.
If you enjoy time travel movies because they confuse you and they're very convoluted and you're trying to like understand the story, our whiteboard that we had out was drawn all over after this movie. I think I had a great experience.
This one's definitely one you want to watch a second time, as with a lot of time travel movies.
So breaking into the top 3 now, we have a tie for third place because we couldn't quite figure out our third place spot.
Yeah, we were having trouble deciding because we didn't really know. Yeah, we couldn't really push those other 2 down. So I think these both fit very well in the number 3 spot.
Yeah, so this is going to be a tie between 12 Monkeys
and Donnie Darko.
So starting off with 12 Monkeys.
Yeah, it was... I thought it was good.
Yeah, I thought so too. It was at a point in Bruce Willis's career before he stopped caring, which is nice. It's very solid. It's very easy to understand. It's a remake
It's pretty easy to understand time travel movie, which is nice.
Yeah, it's a good kind of introductory time travel movie. This might be a good one to start off with if you're gonna watch through all of these.
It's also, I want to point out, kind of a remake, sort of.
Yes, it's a remake kind of extension of La Jetée, which is this like avant-garde French movie from the 60s. And I think it does well fleshing that out.
Yeah, definitely. Donnie Darko.
Donnie Darko is.
So I didn't really know. This is another reason it's kind of tied, is because I don't really even know if this classifies as a time travel movie. It kind of does.
It has, it has time travel, and the thing that makes it a time travel movie for me is it fundamentally feels like a time travel movie because you're constantly questioning what's going on. It's a very mysterious movie. This movie feels like you're in the dark constantly, and it's in this dark world where the characters are dark, and it's just it's a very strangely constructed world, and there's so much going on with the time travel where it's like I don't really understand how this works.
This is another
like,
one where, like Primer, it'd be really nice to rewatch, which we haven't done. That's why I'm kind of still confused about the whole story. But I think that's mostly kind of why it's on this list, is because it's one of the ones you want to rewatch.
But this one also, it's like you have to do a lot of kind of research to understand what's really going on in this movie. Like you have to look at some behind the scenes commentaries and stuff. But it is a fascinating setup for how the time travel works.
So coming in at number 2, another Bruce Willis movie, Looper.
So this is what I classify as the last movie Bruce Willis really shines in, because he is really good in this movie. This was 2012. On the surface, it doesn't look like it's going to be that much. It doesn't look like it's going to be that good, because it looks like a Bruce Willis movie from recently.
I really like this movie, though. It's maybe one of my favorites besides the number 1 spot. That's why it's number 2.
This was very close, we will note. Between this could easily have been number 1 too, but we'll get into that a little bit more later. But this movie sets up a world that's very unique, because it's not just time travel. There's also some abilities in this movie.
Yeah, it's like, it's very like a futuristic world. Like, it seems like it's possible to have happen.
And it confronts one of the biggest questions of time travel, that is, if you could go back and kill a terrorist when they were a child, would you and could you? And it also confronts the other question of what happens if you and your double from the future have a confrontation? How does that work?
I think I just like how the time travel works in this movie. How stuff happens and like how paradoxes work in this movie is a really just good way to do time travel, and that's why I like it a lot.
Yeah. If you think too hard about it, it starts to not make a ton of sense. But that's what is so great about time travel movies, is you really have to think about it a lot, and you kind of have to draw it out for it to make sense. And that's definitely the case here. And this one draws out into a great timeline. This is, I think, my favorite use of a crazy paradox timeline.
It's not that hard of a thing to draw out either. It's not like Primer, which is or like Bandersnatch, which is like loops going both ways. It's a pretty simple loop, but it's also remains complex at the same time.
And finally, coming down to the number 1 spot on today's list, this is going to be Predestination. So this is
this is so good. I really enjoy this time travel movie.
This is a hard movie to even explain, especially without giving spoilers, but it is incredibly satisfying. It stars Ethan Hawke and Sarah Snook, both incredible. This is the movie I always think of when I see either of them, because it's such a riveting movie.
This movie is so good because no matter what, it's just watertight. Like, everything makes sense. If you think about anything in this movie that you're like, oh, what, that's kind of weird, that doesn't make sense, it gets solved. Or if you think about it and make it work, it works.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that's like, well, like, how is that possible? Like, what happens with Primer?
It also makes use of its time setting very well, too, because it takes place, like, between the 50s and the 70s. And you feel that era in the costumes and the sets, but it's it's mind-boggling that this all comes together and works so incredibly well. Like you were
I
saying,
just want to know,
watertight is the perfect adjective for this.
like, just the scripting on this movie and just the thinking of this movie seems like it would take just forever. It is like, it's maybe one of the best.
It's brilliant because it's fundamentally simplistic, but also so complicated, and that's why it has to be the number one spot for today's list.
Because you can think of it on an easy level. I'm thinking of it like, oh, like, yeah, this guy goes back in time and stuff like that. But you can actually think of it in a much more detailed level, and it also makes a lot of sense.
It's also structured very differently from your typical time travel movie. It's told a lot through flashbacks, which complicates things, of course, but it has a drawn out first act where you really get to know these characters, and it's just a long conversation between the two main characters, Ethan Hawke and Sarah Snook, at this bar, and they're just talking for a long time, and you're starting to wonder, like, the time travel part doesn't even come into it until a ways in.
Which I think is nice, because if movies jump into time travel right off the bat, it can mess things up and make it more convoluted than it has to be. Like, the start of Looper is like, basically, he's like, time travel was invented in the future, but they can teleport people back. And that can make things confusing, but this movie is very, like, just wrapped up in a nice little bow.
If you take anything from this video, watch Predestination. It's one of my favorite movies of all time.
I would highly recommend it. It's probably in my top 5 movies all time. It's very good.
Yeah, and overlooked too. I don't hear enough people talking about this movie. Anyways, that is going to wrap up the list. This has been Maxify Top 5s and / Maxify Seminar.
I think we've done one before. I'm not sure though.
Maybe. I've been Max.
I've been Blake.
We'll see you in the next one.